Hi everyone. I believe we are. If someone could just put in the chat that you can hear us all right. We've had a few technical issues this afternoon already. Brilliant. That's fine. We're all in. We all got locked out for a while earlier. Thank you so much for joining us, and apologies that we are running a few minutes late. Hopefully we'll be able to still cram as much into this session as possible. I'm really excited about this one. We've got brilliant panelists joining me today. But just a quick kind of housekeeping. We're going to do this as 30 or 40 minutes of kind of panel discussion. Please do put questions in the question you see in the chat thing. There's like a little question thing at the top as we go. And then what we'll do is we'll spend, depending on how many questions there are, we'll spend 20, 30 minutes in the second half addressing those questions and kind of having a chat between us, because I'm sure we've got lots of kind of specific actionable things that we'll discuss, but I'm sure people will have their own questions as well. So by way of introduction, if you don't know me, I am Molly, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Flexa Careers. Flexa is the global directory of verified flexible companies. And what that means is that we enable our users all over the world, 70 different countries, to search by how they will work as well as what they will do. So think about remote first or hybrid working 1 or 2 days a week, dog-friendly offices, flexible hours. You put all those filters on and everything comes up in front of you on Flexa. For companies, that means you get discovered for being truly flexible. So increase the awareness of your brand, but also improve at the consideration point as well. So people could be talking to recruiters or looking at other job platforms, and they'll come onto Flexa, check what is on offer. So the source of truth when it comes to flexible working. Talking flexible working, see a topic that is very, very close to a lot of our users and a lot of our companies' hearts is working parents. Flexibility is obviously one of the most important things to a working parent in their career. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of people who know far more than I do about this topic. So we've got myself, I am not a parent. We have Catherine from Trulair, who is also not a parent. And then we have the two Sarahs who are both parents. So they will be able to have a whole spectrum of various different opinions. So lovely. Could you introduce yourself? I'll go with Catherine first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having us, Molly. I'm really looking forward to what comes up in this discussion, and I've noticed that we've already got quite a few different countries that are logging in, so I think it's going to be an interesting Q&A. So my name is Catherine Lightfoot. I'm VP of People at Trulair. Trulair is an open banking platform. Just to let you know, I'm in the office. I don't have I love open banking cushions in my own home yet. On to merch about that and talk to marketing. So what is open banking? A lot of people ask me. So basically, our motto is to change the way the world pays. And what that means is that we have a software layer that connects banks directly to financial applications. So if you are a consumer, you may see us when you're at the checkout and you have an option to pay via your card, pay later, or pay directly from your bank account, so skipping the card process entirely. And if you get that option, there's a good chance that that's us that's supporting that layer there. So that's a little bit about, in a nutshell, open banking, but it's a much deeper and in-depth conversation that we could have at another time as well.
Very nice and succinct way of explaining that. I don't think I could have done such a good job. Now I'm going to refer to Sarah Hess as Bubble Sarah, just to keep things less confusing. So Bubble Sarah, here you go.
Everyone, I'm really happy to be here. So I help run Bubble, which is an app to find local childcare. I'm hugely passionate about the power of childcare and how the role it plays in our society and trying to get to gender equality and pay equality. I'm also just really excited. And when Molly and I first chatted, I was just so over the moon that the flexible conversation is such a kind of mainstream conversation now, because actually I think it was, to start with, something that parents were sort of, would shamefully kind of ask for, and begrudgingly might get a kind of 4.5-day week. And now that conversation has widened so much, and it's brilliant to have conversations like this today, which is a really broad audience talking around what it's like to be a parent in the workforce and how we can better support parents. Childcare is an enormous factor when it comes to being a working parent. It's totally the only reason I'm able to work is because I have enormous amounts of childcare. I've got 3 kids and I love my job, and I feel very, very lucky that I am able to stay working, because for many women, unfortunately, that is not the case. whether it's because they can't find flexible working environments, can't make it work, and crucially and really depressingly, the cost of childcare is stopping more and more women from working right now. So really have to be here, and lots to talk about.
Awesome. Thank you very much for a fantastic introduction. We've now got Grim Oatley, Sarah.
Hey everyone, so great to be here. I'm coming in from Austin, Texas, but you can probably hear I'm from further south than that originally. I'm Australian. My company is Growmotely, and we are a remote work platform. And I'm so excited to have this conversation because everything that we're talking about really is like made possible through remote work and flexible work and kind of what remote work and what happened over the last couple of years opened up for us. So Remotely specifically has a strong focus on culture because I'm so excited about the fact that now anyone anywhere in the world can work for a company anywhere in the world. So we get to work in places that suit us from a culture perspective, but also level of flexibility and all of that sort of stuff. So tons of alignment here, really excited. I'm a working parent myself. I have an 18-month-old and have my nanny, who I have a full-time nanny usually. She's just had her own baby. So I've been basically without childcare for about 4 months. So I can definitely share, what it's like with full-time childcare and without while working from home in my most recent experience. But yeah, there's lots of challenges and lots of opportunities in this space, I think. So Bubble is dope and very needed.
Awesome. Let's get into it. So I think building on Bubble Sarah's point there, I think for a long time, flexible working was seen more as the domain of working parents, like specifically working mums. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of held back the growth of flexible working because it wasn't normalized, right? It wasn't accepted. It was seen as you had to have a reason to request flexible working. And when I was just starting out in my career, been in investment banking for about 2 years. And I have an autoimmune disease that means that sometimes I can't walk, and it really intensified at that point, and to the point where like probably about once a week I couldn't walk. So obviously literally couldn't get into an office. So I was to work from home 1 day a week. And I remember a conversation and it was very much like, well, you don't need it. There's no reason. It's not like you have children or someone you have to be there for. And I was like, it's really interesting that my reason isn't good enough. And I think, although that might seem like, oh, I wish it wasn't just for working mothers, I actually think it's held us back. And I think it actually makes it much harder for working mothers to access flexibility because it's seen as, oh, you need it, which means you're not going to be as committed to your career because you're making an exception for your children. I'm hoping that, COVID and being plunged into flexible working has changed that rhetoric and changed that view to some extent. Sorry, my dog going back to there. Changed that view to some extent. And what I hope is that what we can do is say that flexible working is also for night owls. It's also for people with autoimmune diseases and conditions. It's also for people who, just want to travel the world and experience a different way of working. And by normalizing that, it no longer becomes you have to ask permission to work flexibly as a mother or as a father. And it's just ingrained and normal. It means you can find a working environment to thrive. With that in mind, could we just talk about the kind of challenges of being a working parent in a traditional 9 to 5 kind of office environment? Obviously, both Sarahs can definitely speak about this.
I never did it, so I can just. But sorry, I'll just jump in. I can't even imagine doing it. Like, what on earth? Like, I don't know how anyone would do it. I had my baby. I've been working remotely since 2014, so a long time, but my son's only 18 months old. But what I needed as a new mum and what I needed in my life to nourish and nurture myself and my child and my family, I have no idea how that is in any way possible in a traditional kind of office environment. And I remember talking to one of the girls who works for me who shared her stories of being in that same early stages, especially of motherhood, of like running to stairwells and toilet stalls to pump milk during the day and, rushing back home at night to get an hour with her baby before he went to sleep or whatever. And I'm just like, I am so grateful that I don't have to do any of that. So I can't give the comparison for myself of like being a mum with an office and without, but I honestly can't imagine it. And I'm just like so much respect for people who do it and have done it.
I think it's so fascinating. Nothing prepares you for this. So like I I love my job. I've always loved my job. Working is a really important part of who I am. It's part of my identity. And when I had my first, I really thought that I was going to want, a lot of time at home. And I found it really, really freaking hard having a baby. And someone who'd been like running an ad agency, quite in control of my life, suddenly just totally floored me having a baby. And I was quite lonely. I didn't love those first weeks, which I know is some people say sort of sacrilegious, but everyone has their own experience. And for me, I was kind of desperate to go back to work, and I really wanted to be strong. And this is the other thing that I think is an almost added pressure on working mums, that I kind of wanted to go back and set an example, not like in a big like fist in the air way, but just to be like, I want to be able to prove that I can do this. And I worked in an agency. It was a pretty small agency, an ad agency. I was the only working mum there, and I sort of felt there were a lot of more junior women there, and I wanted to be a kind of role model, and I wanted so much to put those boundaries in place and be able to leave. But it was a much more challenging. And Sarah, it's really interesting how you talk about it was bloody hard. It really was actually, and I was there were some things about going back to work which I absolutely loved. Adult conversation, a hot cup of tea that I would actually drink the whole of, but it's much easier in lots of ways being at work than looking after young kids at home.
Oh my God, yes.
But it yes, exactly. And doing both, Sarah, I don't know how you're not totally loopy, so well done.
Well, I am pretty loopy. There's definitely been some interesting moments.
Because that is the hardest of all. But it is really hard. And I had my first baby. She's going to be 10 next year, so we're talking a while ago. And I really want to believe, and I think things have moved on. I worked in a male management team. I was the only woman. They were all dads, by the way, so they had no excuse. But it was tough, and I had to leave at exactly 5 o'clock. I used to work just by Oxford Circus, and I used to have to literally fight the crowds, sprinting through tube stations to get home, like breathless, to get to the childminder in time, because I knew that I had to be there by 6 o'clock on the dot. And it was hideous. And I would try and play it cool, and I tried to pretend I had it under control, but honestly, I'd get home and like be a wreck, because it was just very, very hard. And I think there was a lot of lack of compassion and understanding where I worked. And I still kind of feel a little bit bad that I didn't make more of a fuss about it. To be honest, I wasn't stronger about it, and it wasn't more vocal, because I got to the stage where I'd kind of sheepishly go head down and like get out of the office without making sort of eye contact with anyone, where I should have walked out with my head up high, because that was what I was allowed to do, and that was totally reasonable to leave at 5 o'clock. And no one was going to die, and no one was getting any worse of me. In fact, I was a hell of a lot more efficient, and still am so much more efficient between my working hours now than I was pre-having kids. And you discover new ways of working when you have very hard deadlines of childminder pickups. So I feel very mixed about my return to work and how I managed it. But on the whole, I do think there is now more dialogue happening and more understanding. Particularly, the pandemic has obviously helped that a little bit, because we've seen it in people's homes. And so, but it's really tough. It's really tough doing both. Being a working parent is not easy.
Yeah. I think also, sorry.
I was just going to say, I have a slightly different perspective to add to that, just in terms of the flexible request, because I think we touched on that. I thought that was really interesting. So as a non-parent, for the last couple of years in my last 2 organizations, I've actually reduced my hours. And when I first did that was a really tough conversation, because I'm not a parent. That's known in the office, and people were like, what? What were you doing? Okay. And I wasn't asking to contract my hours. I was actually saying to the organization, no, you can pay me less. I'm going to work a little bit less. I'm going to do it slightly differently for various reasons, and it's what works for me. I went into the reasons at the time. But the first time I did that was a really tough conversation to have. And I think the first time I did that was 2019, pre-COVID. And then, but having gone through it and sort of built the case, it's definitely something that I've been able to take with me into other organizations, and actually encourage the conversations that happen now with my team, whether they are people who are parents or not. But it's been really interesting to see that shift in the last 3 years, to request that, and just to have that what's good. That's a really interesting cultural challenge.
Yeah, there's quite an expectation attached to it, and I did the same in my job before starting Flexa. I asked to go down to a 4-day week to start Flexa, my baby, and yeah, it was that same why. And I was like, oh, I'm actually starting a business, and I didn't know whether to say that or not. Like with another company, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. They're very supportive about it, but that initial judgment was very much like, oh, why? Like, what's the reason? Exactly the same experience that you had, Catherine. I think also some people have put in the chat there, like a really, really good point that I want to touch on a bit is around gender equality, right? The kind of expectation that it falls to working mums to take flexible hours or to compress their hours or work a 4-day week or, basically restructure their work life. The fact that that is generally expected to fall to mums is a massive issue in itself, but also the fact that the expectation is that mums will do that means also that then men, when they ask for flexible working or when they might want to be more involved in kind of the early management of their career and children, it's almost judged a little bit more heavily for men than it is for women. And I think it's very interesting if we look at how demand for flexible working changed between genders pre-COVID and post. So it used to be that demand for flexible working was hugely driven by women. 73% of women wanted flexible working, and it was under 30% of men. Now, actually, post-COVID, that demand from women dropped slightly. Interesting, at home too much, with children probably. And women, it went to 71%, but men went all the way up to 68%. So the demand for it has pretty much risen to being identical.
Wow.
But, I don't think that we've progressed quite far enough for those reasons. With men, it's more like, oh yeah, I love going to the gym, or, I love traveling the world. Whereas with men, if it's like, I want to spend more time with their children, like there's still a bit of a different reaction to when women will say that. So I'd love to understand, and I think this is a really interesting one for Catherine's the True Love point of view to start on, like what working environment have you created that tries to foster that equality and tries to foster an environment where not just working mothers, but everyone can thrive?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I will say, so I've been here just coming up to 6 months now. So a lot of the work that's in place is people who've gone before me, and they've done a brilliant job. But I think the thing that stands out, because I can talk about the ins and outs of what's in the policy and what we mean by enhance, but I think there's two big things that I think that these guys have done a great job building is first of all, we took away any kind of minimum tenure to for any policies to kick in. That's particularly important in pat leave. So I know that and statutory maternity pay. So a lot of organizations, you need to be there for X amount of time before anything kicks in. We just took it away completely. And which means that we've really been able to hire people who are mid-term pregnancy and things like that, and actually, not just pay lip service to these policies, which I think is fantastic. There's the second bit that I think has actually been crucial, because it's all very well having these things written down, but I think our leadership team have done a really good job at role modeling this. So we're tech, we're STEM, we are predominant. I don't like our gender split at the moment, and we are doing a lot of things around that, but it's across all of STEM and tech. So our leadership teams are mixed, but when we get up into the C-suite, we have a little bit of a gender imbalance. However, that said, we've done a really good job at role modeling that. So all of our core team, our parents, people are very visible with their diaries. I'm pretty transparent across the organization anyway, and time is blocked out, things like that. People are very vocal about, look, I'm dealing with the kids right now, or I'm going this, or I'm actually taking that pat leave, which is pretty important too. And I think without leadership role modeling that, it becomes that's where the culture comes from, right? So I feel that I can go and I can ask that too, even though it's written down on a piece of paper. If I don't see it being acted out, then how do I know that nobody's going to kind of mark me down for actually requesting this in the first place? So I think that's something that I was really impressed by, particularly in a scale up, in a startup that's been going at huge speed, that the leadership have sort of focused on, we all have families, we're all human, and modeled that out, which I think has definitely trickled down and made sense for the rest of the organization, which allows people to say, oh, I know the policies are there, and they're not just lip service. These guys actually mean it. So I think that having the policy in place, removing the tenure, and making sure that leadership are embodying that and role modeling it has been a huge part of that, I think, for us.
Absolutely, it's so important. You can't say you're truly flexible and offering all of these things if senior leadership aren't exhibiting those same behaviours. It's very interesting. I posted about this specific thing on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, and there was huge backlash from people. They were like, no, if we have the policy, it's just culturally accepted. I was like, no, it's not. Like, you have to be that person that is exhibiting that leaving early is all right, going to a kid's sports day is all right, taking full maternity or paternity leave is all right. Otherwise, people won't feel that level of psychological safety to do that. And it's one of the things that we measure in when we benchmark companies and their flexibility. One of the key ones that we focus on when we ask employees is, do senior leadership exhibit these behaviours? And it's one of the heaviest weighted questions within the quiz, which you can see is pinned at the top, that little purple one, if you want to see. But it's a really, really interesting point, and I guess it must be at the forefront of the two Sarahs. Sorry, bundling you in together. Minds as you're building a company.
Yeah, and I think it comes particularly, I've seen it work very successfully around the gender piece, actually, where you started with this question, Molly, around some interesting comments around that in the chat around gender equality, because it's fascinating, and I actually do feel quite optimistic about this area. Like, things are moving slowly, but things are moving a lot quicker than they were. So shared parental leave was first introduced in 2015. In 2016, I think the take up was like 0.08% or something ridiculous. It was pathetic, and it moved at a sluggish pace, and because it's a massive cultural shift you're asking for when it comes down to it. And for people to be brave enough, and particularly dads to be brave enough to say, I want to take parental leave, they have to see it modeled. And what is quite exciting now is you are seeing some really big companies, and actually big companies are ones that tend to be leading the way here, because it's not cheap, these kind of policies, doing equal parental leave for mums and dads, and that is quite revolutionary when you think about it. When I think back when I had my first baby, say 9 years ago, that was just not the case. And now you are seeing a lot of these big policies, and you're seeing the leaders of these companies. I know that Aviva's a great one. I think Zurich have some really good examples as well. So University of Arts London last week announced the same policy, where you're seeing senior people. I'm not in these organizations, so I don't know for a fact, but seem to be really championing this and doing it, actually taking that leave. And that is how you get culture change with an organization, undoubtedly. And it is harder as a smaller startup to do all that stuff. And I spend a lot of time talking to HR directors, and there's a really interesting challenge at the moment where a lot of people, whereas the trend was to really focus on maternity leave and like getting that as good as possible. Now the trend is really, let's get it equal, which I think is amazing. But it does mean that some people are having to row back on their maternity leave in order that they can get equal, which is a very interesting kind of dilemma. And I think everyone's still trying to work out where they sit on this, because it's not a straightforward question. But I think giving dads 3 months, 6 months parental leave shifts things massively culturally, because that is the starting point. That is where we're seeing women drop out. We're seeing women take all the responsibility and the mental load. And if you can get some even footing, and it's not even to start with, I have to be very clear on that, because a woman has to have 9 months of pregnancy and go through quite a traumatic childbirth. So you have to legally, women have to take some time off. So it's not equal to start with. But if you can get that 3 months, 6 months, amazing, you start to get that even. And then it's not just who returns, assume that the dad will return to work. It's all they're going to be the mum taking up all the childcare responsibilities and dealing with all the many nurseries and childminders and all that stuff. That is exciting, and that is where I think culture change can really happen, where you get it at the start.
Yeah. Remotely, Sarah, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how to deal with this, like all of these shifts and changes in like a large corporate with incumbent structures and systems and policies. Like, there's a lot that needs to shift and change, but a lot of like influence and really positive power that comes from making those changes for our societies in general. As a much smaller growing startup, we're 18 people. We don't even have policies. Like, I have a bit of a stance against even documenting and policy driving a lot of this stuff and really aiming to embody it in our culture a lot more. One of the things that we embrace is more like unlimited leave, just you are here in this role in the company and this is your areas of responsibility, and we're also a team. And so when you need to take time off, whether it's, it just happened today and I've got to go deal with something with my kid for the afternoon, like, we got you, we'll cover you, or probably everything will be fine, like, just go do it, right? Or if it's a planned thing where I need to take time out, we work as a team to figure out, like, what do you need? Like, what is your unique situation? What do you desire? And then we figure it out. So, maybe as we grow, we're going to have to document all of this stuff, but I'm really curious to experiment how we can not document and policy drive and create all of these rules and really embrace ultimate flexibility, which is like, we are a group of embodied, empowered, sovereign adults coming together to work on these projects, who are in charge of our own lives, and what we want and desire for our lives is completely okay and valid, and provided it works for the company, which is just a conversation, and it's okay if it doesn't as well and we don't have alignment there. But I'm really focusing on building that from the core of our leadership team and our core team now as we grow out, to embody really allowing individuals to show up in the way that works best for them. And so there's a lot of flexibility. I mean, I really don't mind what people do, but I think it's very important to lead from the front on that. And so to kind of circle back on some of those points, like, everybody knows, I thought I was going to take 2 weeks off when my baby was born because I had no freaking idea what was actually about to happen. I was like, I'm like, I was 39 when he was born. I'm 41, so a little bit of an older mum, but 20 solid years of like workaholic work experience behind me running companies. And I was like, yeah, I should be good. I'll work right up to the day he's born, and then like 2 weeks should be fine. Like, I'll be back. I'll probably ease into it week 2. Meanwhile, 2 months later, I mean, I wouldn't say I wasn't working, but I was not working at the capacity that I could. But that was just a communication that we were having with my team the whole way, and they were like, okay, cool. Like, we got you, we got this, and that's the kind of thing that we aim to do. And during this period where I've had no childcare, or a lot less childcare, I've been like juggling different nannies and things to help out here and there, but for 4 months now, haven't had that full-time support that we usually have. Thankfully, our new nanny is starting on Monday, so everybody just celebrate with me. But I've just been really transparent with my team about that. Like, I got Luca, Joe, my husband, and I like to talk about some of the stuff for men as well. He is also an entrepreneur and has his own company. We both run our businesses remotely. So we're very much co-parenting, and it's very much us every week going, okay, well, where can you cover? Where can I cover? And then we go and communicate that back with our teams. And that's certainly, I think, what's important is to really show up as a leader of an organization, or just we're all leaders in our own way, like embodying what we believe to be, what we feel to be, in our highest alignment, and modeling that out to others to make it okay and make it possible. And so I've had, men in our team become parents, and just sat down and really had a conversation of like, what's your dynamic at home? Like, what do you need? What are your plans with your partner? And how do we kind of facilitate that? And making sure, like, I'm more of an advocate for pushing parents to take some leave now, which I still want to make it their choice though. I really still want it to be their choice. Like, that's what I think. We move forward to a society where people truly check in with themselves about what they actually want, not what they think is expected of them, is what I'm desiring. So if somebody really says, I really want to take 2 weeks fully off and then I really want to come back, and knowing that the conversation's open, if that's not, like, I want them to be empowered to do that. And if they say to me, I really want to take 6 months off to be with my child, we go, all right, how do we make that work? Like, what budget can the company give you toward that? We probably can't pay you 6 months full time, and that's just nature of being an early stage startup. That might change as we get bigger. We might be able to create more certainty around policies in that area. But ultimate flexibility and ultimate personal sovereignty is what I'm very excited about in the world, whether it's related to childcare or any other aspect of work.
So there's a huge thing about trust there as well, Sarah, isn't there? I think from the beginning, when you were saying about not having, don't even put it on paper. because we trust, people are just going to come and ask. And it's funny, actually, I was talking about this with one of the people in my team who'd helped build some of the policies that we now have. And I remember I was talking to some of the parents, because we've got some really cool stuff here. We've got, like, as well as our normal leave, we have 12 days of what we call well-being days. And the idea, and that's, you get 3 per quarter, and that's no questions asked. It's not, you don't need to approve it. It's for you, right? And I was talking to some of the parents, and they were saying, oh, sometimes I use the well-being days, and I was sort of thinking, oh, that's not what they were designed for. They're designed for you as an individual, rather than to cover like, I've got to go and pick the little one up because they're sick, they've got the measles, they've got the chicken pox, so I've got to go and get them from school, and that's me wiped out for a week. We don't want you to have to then use your well-being days, your PTO, or whatever that is. And I was kind of thinking, in my old places, we used to have this thing called dependence leave, and typically it'd be 5-10 days, something like that. And I was kicking that around with the team, going, did we not consider this? And that came up to that point of, yeah, but then if you say you've got 5 or 10 days dependent leave, you've only got 5 or 10 days dependent leave. The reality is you're gonna need what you need, and we trust that you'll figure that out.
And that's why you've got to have childcare. Childcare is a benefit as well. That's sort of my drum to beat, but that's where things like childcare can really help support your employees actually attend work when they want to, not when they don't want to.
That's some of the resistance that I have around, like, getting super rigid in the name of flexibility by creating all these different types of leaves and policies. Is like, somebody just wrote here about grief, and it doesn't last a few days. No, fuck no, it doesn't. Like, it lasts as long as it lasts. And I can have a day where I'm grieving the death of my father, which happened 10 years ago, and I need to take a day. Like, I need to just, something could come up, you never know. But I think having these ongoing conversations around life and what's happening and how it's happening and what is needed in that moment is much more useful than, and I'm not completely against policies, by the way, and I very much understand that in bigger companies, I think I don't mean to, kind of go down that path, but in bigger companies, it's probably much needed, because we need to make decisions. We need to kind of keep things moving and have a framework. But where can we lean into frameworks, values, documenting, like, how we desire to work a little bit away from, like, policies, rules, and things like that, so that we can keep the human spirit to it, because things are always evolving. We don't know, maybe someone needs 10 mental health days or wellbeing days this quarter, but doesn't actually need any next quarter because they're crushing it and their workload's not that high, and they're actually finding they don't even have to work that much because, like, work fluctuates as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion to have, and I think there's probably a middle ground to be found, where, like, some things do have to be documented, not just from a, this is what you'll access, transparency perspective, and signposting the kind of organisation that you are. We say this is what we offer, and it's set for everybody. But there's also obviously a degree of flexibility where that can't be the case. You have to be a people-first organisation, understanding, giving people the chance to be treated like adults in an environment where, they're performing an adult job. That's what they're doing. That's why they're here. And I think one of the things that will happen as we move towards that kind of future of work is when more companies move towards an output-driven culture rather than a hours-based and presenteeism-based culture. That kind of trust and flexibility and not one size fits all becomes a lot easier, because you're like, well, if you're still performing and you want to leave at 3:00 every Wednesday because you've got jiu-jitsu or a child or you love cooking, like, fine, it doesn't matter. But I do think that the way that performance is measured has to change quite significantly before more companies can actually adopt that. Which brings me to probably the final discussion point before we open up to questions. Advice for companies, for people, HR leaders, people in this space that are trying to create an inclusive environment. I guess, what would your biggest pieces of advice be for people who are starting out on that journey, or maybe coming across some challenges at the moment with it? Bubbles, Sarah, I'll start with you. Oh, have we lost?
Sorry, I'm having a few problems hearing everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can hear me. Okay, sorry, from the car, live from the car. So in terms of advice for for working, how to manage working parents in your organization, I mean, there's a lot, but one thing we kind of touched on, which I think is an interesting point, is around, like, making the flexibility that people don't have to agree to stuff before they've had their baby. So one of the conversations I had with a very senior HR person recently was like this bit, like, reminded me a bit of what you were saying, Sarah, like, I'm not going to change, I'm going to carry on, nothing's going to change. Like, you are going to change, like, that is scientific, biological, psychological fact. Like, physically you change, like, so many, you do change, and it's a positive thing, like, don't get me wrong, but that I think having the flexibility of a mindset of an employer, like, you can't predict how people are going to respond to having kids, and I think that's really important, and that's flexibility, all about flexibility. I also think I talk to a lot of organizations who think this isn't a problem. Like, they don't think they're either their demographic is very young, so they don't think they need to address family issues. And that is a total fallacy. I mean, actually, and more than ever, there's some incredible stats around how people, Gen Z and people in their 20s are now looking at parental policies way before they have kids, way smarter than I did, by the way, who had no idea, looking at those parental leave policies to make decisions around where they work and how they work and who they work for. So I think that's one thing I really watch out for. And then the final thing I have to say, because it's my job and all I talk about all the time, is childcare. Like, childcare is everything. If particularly right now with the cost of living, childcare is another mortgage. It's a third of most people's families' household income if they've got to work. It's an enormous expense. And now more than ever, parents need help. And if you can subsidise childcare in any small way, it makes a big difference, even just as a statement of who you are as a company. So those are my 3 points.
Awesome. Catherine, I'll come to you next. What advice would you have for HR leaders?
It's I mean, we could keep going, couldn't we? And this, and I'm taking them. I've got my pen because I'm actually taking notes from the Sarahs as well. I think it's really important to understand your organization. I think Sarah's mentioned that and made a good point there. Like I said, we're in tech. Are we focusing on women? But actually we're focusing on fathers. And I think we're at a point now as organizations, what we're 40% of the workforce are working parents. You as an organization, you need to really bear that in mind and think you can't afford not to be attractive. So it's how attractive do you want to be in the marketplace to whether it's parents or flexibility for all the other reasons that we've talked about. So my advice would be to really understand that and understand your demographic talent pool and what they're looking for, and to have a look about the bit that I talked about earlier of where are the gaps in your leadership to see this coming to life. Are you modeling this?
Enjoyed our surprise guest there. Very appropriate. That's how you co-parent in remote working, live on a webinar. Do the handoff, let the baby say hi. Yeah, he's our chief cuteness officer, Luca, remotely. One of my teams on this. I think my advice would be, remember that we're people. We're talking to people, about people. We're building companies for people, and keep that conversation open. Talk to people about what they need. Check in with how they're truly experiencing the levels of flexibility, the structures that we have in the company. Like, not only when they're going through it, but like just generally, like surveying and talking with people so that we can constantly improve these things in our organizations and constantly be learning. But really just remembering that, we're people and we're complex and we're evolving, and sometimes we have to evolve the structures and systems and documented ways that we work together as we evolve as organizations, as people. So I think that would be my advice, is just not to forget about the fact that we're humans and there's only so much we can. This is literally the world we're trying to move away from, is a world that was very much treating human beings as machines, and bringing them into an office and clocking in and clocking out, and basically you sit there, there's the bathroom, this is what time you can have a lunch break. Like, there was no decision, no thought making for the individual person. So we're literally trying to move into a new world where we stop treating humans and as cogs in a machine, and we start treating them as people who are empowered and who are
capable and able and can contribute a hell of a lot more when they know who they are and when they have that trust and empowerment to operate in the way that is most effective for them in respect to what's going on in their lives.
Definitely. I think it's really, really, really useful advice. And I think just from our perspective at Flexa, speaking to so many companies and seeing what our users want as well, I think that there are 3 pieces of advice that I'd give as well. And one is, Sarah from Grow Remotely, you touched on it, like ask people. Like if you're going to be creating policies, like ask people what they want. And it's really interesting. It doesn't just, it extends beyond that towards the whole of flexible working. You'd be amazed at how many companies will ask me and they'll be like, how do we go about, creating a genuinely flexible work environment? I'm like, well, have you spoken to your employees and asked them what they want? No.
And like, do we need a policy around stuff? I actually read a book early in my career that was so helpful for me that talked about how so many policies are created for the 1%. Someone does something or some situation happens and the company goes, oh my God, we don't want this ever to happen again. So let's create a big policy around it. And one, it ostracizes the person who maybe kind of instigated this situation from happening. And it also creates this framework for 99% of the people that whatever that thing is may never happen or occur. So how about we like talk about the whole thing and what happened and why it happened and how we evolve, and don't just try to like policy up everything in our organizations, which I think we're getting much further away from now, and that was sort of 10-ish years ago. But yeah,
and try and create an environment that works for 80 or 90% of people, not one. And I think that extends also to like think about family leave as a whole. Like it's not just maternity leave, it's paternity leave, it's adoption leave, it's fertility leave, it's all of the big things that come with families. It's not always just mothers and their children. I think the second piece of advice as well is normalize flexibility for everybody. It makes it easier to ask for things. It makes your environment better. It means that everyone can thrive. It's not just specific people that fit that 9 till 5 in office. And then the final one I've already talked about, which was assess performance based on outcome. The most important thing, you'll actually get the most out of people, and particularly parents who want to be able to juggle hours and do things a bit differently, to be able to balance work and personal lives together. I think that was a nice place to kind of finish and open up to questions. We've got loads of questions actually, but I am going to start with, and I think the way that I'll do this is to try and get through them. I'll ask the question, then I'll pick the person that I think is best placed to answer it. If you're not, say no, I'm not the best person to answer it, and you can pass it on to someone else, but we'll just kind of give one answer unless someone has like a burning desire to add on to any points. So I'll start with one for Catherine. So Karen has asked, how, as a leader who is not a parent, do you make an inclusive, how do you build an environment that's inclusive to both parents and non-parents together?
I'd have to ask my team. We've said it a little bit already, but I talk to people. I find out what they want, and I've been not just a leader in this organization, but in other organizations where you can't put like parents and non-parents into 2 separate categories. Parents of kids under 1 versus just starting school versus maybe doing the GCSEs have all got completely different needs, right? And I only find that out of what they need by talking to them and asking them what's going to work for you. And COVID was a really good leveler of that, I think, because I think it was up to that point in the organization I was at previously, we were a little bit led by policy. So everything that Sarah H is saying like really stands out. And even when COVID first hit and everybody went home and I did all this stuff, we just sort of went, right, let's try and say, be at home or do this. And that was just nonsense. So I literally had to have individual conversations with every single person, because some people's schools were open, some people's schools were not open, some people had kids at home anyway. It was completely different. And I think that was a really good eye-opening experience for me when leading teams is, what do you need? Okay, how can I help? Because I'm not going to be able to, I can't guess, I don't know. And you may have some creative solutions, and most people know what they need and what they want, but they need the ability to be able to have that open conversation without fear of going, is it okay to ask for this? So my role really is to be able to create that environment where those conversations are completely natural and normal.
That's incredibly useful. No, I think that's a brilliant answer. I think we have to be aspiring to get to the point where we're creating a working environment where everyone can thrive based on the freedom and the choices that they're given, rather than seeing people as in discrete boxes that need to be catered for within their box. Second, this is a very good question, quite a philosophical one. Who will I give it to? So the question is, do you have any advice for how companies can address the lifetime earnings gap and progression opportunities of parents who take leave? Bubble, Sarah, I think given your kind of career and movement, that would be quite a good one for you to take. Did you hear me properly? Yeah, perfect.
Yes, I did. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Am I there?
Yes, you're there.
Thumbs up, guys. Great. Yeah, this is what I care about incredibly deeply, and I can talk about at length, and I will try and keep it concise and snappy, because we don't want to take up too much time, but it's so important. And by the way, I if we talk about lifetime earnings gap, like if we can get gender equality in the workplace, I genuinely believe that levels up to essentially getting to world peace. Because if we get more female leaders, we have better businesses, we have female politicians who are better outcomes for our company. Like, it solves everything. So I perhaps biasly, do think childcare plays an enormous role at unlocking this, because without childcare, as mentioned, parents cannot work, and at the moment, a lot of that childcare does fall on women, as we know. So what companies can do, because there's another question about what government can do, and this is what companies can do. I think starting out as equally as possible. Catherine and Sarah have spoken so beautifully about treating people as individuals, listening to people, not putting expectations based on other people on individuals. And you've done that so much better than I could, but that's obviously a huge part of this as well. And the kind of culture piece, which is a really tough one, but it comes down to kind of role modeling. It comes down to talking. I love what you said, Molly, about being the person who leaves the sport, says you're going to kids' sports day. Being vocal about that. Like, parenting was like a shame activity when I started. With my elder, who's now my eldest. It was like you weren't allowed to have a picture of your kid, particularly as a woman. Having a picture of your child on your desk was sort of like slightly frowned upon. If you're a man, by the way, good for you. But if you're a mum coming back, it was not cool. And now that has changed. We talk about our kids. We talk about the fact, and that comes down to anything you have outside of work. But that's the kind of culture point. But yes, I really do want to stress that childcare, and that it's a government problem most of all, but businesses can help a little bit by just making it available to their employees. But we've got to get that bit right, and sadly at the moment that's failing pretty badly.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And I guess with companies kind of addressing that lifetime earning gap, one of the first steps that you can kind of take towards that is addressing gender pay gap as well within the same levels, and make sure that everybody is totally fairly paid, regardless of whether they've taken 6 months, 2 years out. If they're equally as well qualified, they should be paid exactly the same as their peers who may have stayed through that time. A question for remotely, Sarah, about the US. Ed asked, is he correct in his understanding that maternity leave in the US is actually really short? And what about paternity leave in the US?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't even know what the actual legal thing is. I'm kind of very identified as like a global citizen, and my company is very globally oriented. So I'm actually not even sure, but I do believe that it's very minimal. And I don't know what they have for men at all, by the law. Yeah, Catherine, you might be better. Yeah.
I said in previous organizations, typically it's around about 6 weeks, and we would have conversations about somebody was going off for 12, and I thought at one point, oh wow, we've updated the policy. No, they're just going to use 6 weeks of their PTO on top of 6 weeks leave. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. And bear in mind, whatever the legal limit is, an organization can choose to completely override that.
Yeah, that's why I don't know what the legal thing is, because I just do my own thing.
Yeah, we have no rights. Think. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I know, like coming from Australia over here, I know, like, even just regular leave, like vacation leave, only in the US you get only 2 weeks, 10 days, and in Australia we have 4 as a minimum by law. So yeah, it's a different world here in terms of some of that stuff. But that's where I think there is just so much opportunity as organisations to, as long as you're going beyond the minimums that are legally required, you don't want to be breaking the law, of course, and taking advantage of people in the wrong way. But creating the policies that feel much more, and the structures and the systems that feel much more resonant for your company and your culture.
Yeah, and that kind of also answers another question that was in there about, small businesses. Obviously, it is a cost, and like sometimes it's not feasible to be able to go above and beyond. But having an open and honest conversation between two parties about what will work for both sides, I think, is ultimately the way forward. You might not be able to do 6 months maternity leave as a startup, but can you do 3 and then say that then you can come back after that 2 or 3 days a week if that's going to plug the business gap. There are different ways that you can but it has to be an open conversation. And to remotely Sarah's point, like, it can't always be in a policy because everybody's situation is ultimately going to be different. Got a question from Lucy that I think Catherine, be very good to hear from you on as well. So how do we remove barriers for internal talent who want to work reduced hours but still want to progress? Hiring managers often want someone full-time in a new role, but internal mobility and knowledge retention is so important. So how do we as employers bridge that gap?
So it's a bit like what I did, though, really, isn't it? So
exactly.
I didn't want to be full-time for the various reasons, and I'm not a parent. And it was, to be honest, even though the conversation was hard, it's never been a barrier so far, other than that getting over, doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
So, but I think I've probably been fortunate from either kind of standing my ground a little bit and knowing that that's what I wanted and that was important to me, versus an organization, kind of accepting that and taking people on. And I suppose it's the same conversation. I can't imagine here now having a conversation that says, well, she's just back from mat leave and she's 6 months back and she's doing 3-4 days. We shouldn't think of her for promotion. I can't even imagine that conversation taking place because it wouldn't now. And we've created that environment, so I can't see why that would happen for non-parents. But that comes from the groundwork in terms of leadership, modeling those behaviors, people taking different time, and we've got to do more of the non-parent stuff. Definitely, we've got to do a bit more than that to make it visible, particularly in the senior leadership roles, so people see that works. People are in those roles, or I can then go and do that. So I'm not sure that's answered the question because I don't have a straightforward answer to it.
Other definitely than has.
Making it visible and doing it really. Particularly, there's a bit of an ownership on leaders doing that as well, because if we don't do it, the people aren't going to feel that they can. And and if you're not doing it, then you are genuinely removing it as a barrier by having honest and open conversations about output and performance rather than about how hours worked or things like that.
Definitely, I think it's moving to that output driven performance measure, because I'm sure we've all come across plenty of people in our careers where somebody that works 3 days a week is actually way more productive than someone who works 5. It depends on how productive you are, how motivated you are, your skills. There's plenty of people. It's like the argument against flexible working. Like, I used to work with a bloke who used to watch cricket for 6 hours a day on a black screen, so no one could see it, but I was directly behind him and I could see. And then we asked to work from home couple of days a week, and they said no, because how will we know if you're doing any work? And I was like, well, you don't know this guy's doing no work either. So and it's, I know, I think
it's so funny how I have a real aversion to the screenshotting, time tracking type software that some companies use for their remote people. I'm like, we didn't do that in the office. So why would we be doing that now that people are at home? Like, oh my goodness, it's so crazy. I think it's all about moving the conversation to what do you want to do in your role? Like, what level of responsibility and kind of areas of accountability do you want to have, and what are the outputs, and having clarity around that, and like how you get it done. and maybe there's a conversation about realistically, can this be done in 3 days? If your desire is to work 3 days, do we both truly agree that, this actually works? And that's just a figuring out the pieces part, but it's not like your brain works less because you're working less hours. You don't become less capable of, solving the same problems you did before, or whatever it might be. Like the idea that, women going back to work after taking some time out and maybe going back 3 days a week need to be demoted. Someone posted about that. Like I've seen that throughout my career. It's one of the things that I just hate so much, unless that's their desire. Like maybe they say, I don't want to, and that's fine. Like it's fine to choose whatever you want for you. But the idea of this kind of norm and standard that someone who was a leader or a manager at a certain level, if they go part-time after children, I just think, what are we saying? That you're not as smart? Like now you're not as capable? Like what on earth?
Yeah, it is absolutely bonkers, the kind of stigma that is still attached to it. We have run out of time, sadly. I think also, just to summarize this point with businesses, like ultimately this is a absolutely brilliant thing that you can be doing for gender equality, for people's happiness, for engagement and productivity. But one of the problems that exists in the market at the moment is a total lack of transparency. Like we obviously mentioned it before, Gen Z are now doing their research on companies about what's on offer before they even go and have children, just so that they're prepared. So being transparent and being clear about the kind of organisation that you are has literally like never been more important. And obviously I'm going to say that we're on an employer brand platform that allows people to be able to discover exactly what's on offer. But we've now got 600,000 people looking for that information. So companies should be disclosing it. It's so, so important. Also, just to try and lead the charge and actually change some things. Ultimately, to Sarah's point, the government aren't exactly doing too much at the moment. So it is largely up to private organisations to try and change some things and to make the world a better place when it comes to balancing our personal lives and our work lives as well. I know that we didn't answer all of the questions. I'm still going to be posting about this webinar on LinkedIn afterwards. So if you've still got questions, come and comment under it, and then I'll be tagging everybody in so we can come back to you on specific bits if we want to. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed it. And obviously check out the two Sarah's businesses. Check out obviously TrueLayer as well for any opportunities, who are also Flexified. They are on Flexa and they do love open banking. So thank you so, so much. And thank you to our panelists. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. It was awesome. It's a good conversation.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.